So I'm going to give you a look into rowing, canoe kayak, open water swimming, some of the primary markets that I work. The focus of this presentation is to give you both a little bit of what rowing is, how the market works, how it's competitive, but also a little bit of some of the solutions that I've developed, things that brought to market, some of the issues that I faced. So when I did this presentation in 2012, a lot of the focus of that presentation was really on the what. But one of the things I really love about Lynx is the fact that there's values behind the brand and the company. There's an element of fairness, so I figured it was finally my time to talk about fairness. So again, I think one of the hardest things to talk about in terms of sports is really how you apply fairness, and so I had an opportunity in the last couple of years to do that with World Championships for rowing, so I'm going to share a little bit of my experiences with that today. So again, let's talk about why in sports like rowing, photo finish really matters. It really allows you to evaluate all those, all competitors, not just specific ones where there's a close race. And so rowing, for example, has time trials. In all those scenarios, it's really important. From a selling perspective, it's a huge advantage. Like I said, when we started doing time trials, and I'll talk about the head of the Charles, which is one of our first clients, it really eliminated timing fields. So from a fairness perspective, it made a huge difference to competitors. And we went from having hundreds, in that case, of timing protests to literally zero. The officials, again, I think tend to be, for me in particular, the biggest selling point. The actual race officials tend to love this. They love the performance of it. When races are really close, the margin is good. It does exactly what you'd expect. And again, you've seen this in other presentations, but the obvious benefits of Lynx are they're well manufactured, it's an elegant solution, and it's integrated. So everything that everybody else has sold, I wholly buy in. So again, with water sports, they tend to have very different distances. So as you can kind of see here, rowing, we tend to have 2K racing. There's also these time trials, and those tend to be a 5K race. Canoe kayak is all over the place. You tend to get 500 meter, 1,000 meter. You also get 200K sprints. And for some of those, you get really interesting loop races where they might run a 5 or a 10K, but there's uneven loops. So I've never found that these sports, I always find that they push me to my limits, just because of that kind of stuff. With open water swimming, there's 5K, there's a 10K, there's also a marathon 25K. So a great way to spend 8 hours. And again, with dragon boat racing, they tend to be shorter races. So again, why use Lynx? Well, the technical precision is really a selling point. With a lot of these races, they are close. Again, I'm going to talk about what happened the last Olympic cycle, but as a result of that, there was a dead heat at an Olympic level. And so again, that's where I've always found it really helpful to sell Lynx. So everybody else, including Paul, is a real fan of the FL600, the new Vision Pro. I'm still getting used to it. There are a couple of circumstances, and I'll show you a couple of pictures later where occasionally we might need the frame height. So with the older Lynx Pro, you get 4,000 pixels. So we still find a couple of courses where we need that, but we're gradually shifting over to using the newer Vision Pro. And again, as everybody else has pointed out, the color and the pictures are superior. So here's kind of a trip down memory lane. So with this is one of the pictures that you can find in the sample. So we shot this, I don't know, like 12 years ago. And so I was explaining to somebody why I love this race, because it was a really close race. It was fantastic. And I'm explaining to him, and I'm looking at the pixels. My inner mind started critiquing this picture. So on the left, you basically see this is how close it was, and I cropped the picture just so that you could see the two boats next to each other. They weren't really that close, but what you can kind of see is that as you get, and again, it shows you the complication of rowing, you've got a white bow ball with water with a lot of light. And so the question with this one started to become, where are the shadows? So again, that's where I'll point out that the newer cameras make it really interesting. It's easier to get the kind of contrast that you really need in water sports. So with this picture in particular, you know, we always have this ongoing debate, you know, on our staff of where that last pixel is. And in this case, that made a huge difference. This was actually dead heat. So something to kind of keep in mind. So again, I can talk all day about the new camera. Luckily, Paul also talked about it. But this is my favorite picture. I mean, this is really why I like the new camera. You know, it's easier to get my gear around. Just saying. Again, as Paul mentioned, you know, being able to use the zoom to 100 with the double, you're effectively getting higher rates. Again, the biggest problem for us in rowing, I think, is always the contrast. So, you know, being able to get you know, good lighting, I think, is really important. Rowing is one of those sports where the white balance really does matter. So, if you've never set the white balance, it's a good thing to, you know, spend 10 or 15 minutes and just, you know, do that at the start of a race. Again, the gamma control makes a big difference. You know, generally within rowing, we're turning the gamma down to adjust for the brightness. With the newer camera, like I showed the form factor I love, but it also has a GPS option, and the reason why that matters for rowing is that generally we have multiple cameras. We're not evaluating using a single computer. Each computer has its own camera, so as a result, if the cameras don't have the same time base, then it's very difficult to align the cameras at the finish when you have multiple. Likewise, if you're using we use cameras for split timing, so in those cases, we eliminate a lot of the drift. Again, the GPS does a pulse per second, so it's constantly resyncing the time base on the camera. So what are really some of the challenges? As you can kind of see here, you get odd angles in rowing. The boats are far away and they're moving slow, so it's always a little bit of a challenge. In this case, you can see you can get, this is a better angle, but we have some courses where, you know, you're right over the venue, so it's essentially a really large depth of field. In some cases, we've had to deal with courses where the far shore is 750 meters, so even if you have, you know, something that designates the far side of the course, it's in water, tilts can be a problem. So again, just some of the general challenges. And then with any of the buildings, it's always a challenge to get proper mounts, and I'll show you some pictures later of some of those challenges. So going through the packages, my recommendation is always to start with the silver package in rowing. That's the one that you really want to start working with. So this includes an extended start range starting device. So again, that just means that you've got a wireless start. You get to start at the finish. The gold package introduces split timing. So you can see here you've got manual split timing, each one of the 500s plus the finish. So you get basically the gear for that, and then you get an REA2 at the finish. This also includes your result TV. So again, if you've got any real needs on behalf of, you know, whoever you're buying for, you're probably going to end up with this package. So again, just from a course perspective, what I showed before was the sprint setup. Again, those are 2,000 meter races. Head races, you can get much more elaborate setups. So in this case, we've got a start camera. We've also got a finish camera. And then for each one of the splits, we would also have a camera doing splits. So when we started the company, there was a huge focus on just getting all that data in one place. And again, with Lynx, with the network COM port and software, easy open architecture to get all that data out, send it to a server. So just talking about, you know, when you're selling a venue, the biggest things that we recommend, obviously, second camera. So for canoe, kayak, you have to have an active system. So on the finish line, you're going to sell second camera. The split timing becomes something that most venues want, especially if they're broadcasting it. And again, for broadcast results, Result TV works great to just get out the data and to send it to other venues. So talking about how big the market is in the U.S., there's more than 1,000 races. it's still interesting. 50% of them are hand time. So this is one of those markets that's always going to have development in it. It's always a question of how many cameras, how many people are buying. And, it's interesting, rowing was a wagered sport back in the 20s and 30s in the US. It's since been banned, and it's supposedly collegiate. But again, the demographics are pretty affluent, and the challenge normally tends to be selling high value and, higher cost. Most of the purchases are really made by foundations and nonprofits. There generally tends to be a bid process or board involvement. It's very relationship-based, but as most people will tell you, a lot of this really has to do with the venues and the facilities. So generally there tends to be master plan, and so if you participate in the master plan development, you generally tend to sell the timing system. So like I was saying, high accuracy is really an important, important thing in this sport. Again, future expansion. Some of the major competitors that we see are really IMAS, who's a German competitor. They have their own camera. They also have a fairly complete solution, including a start light system and a boat dial system. My labs, we don't really see as much anymore. Mostly they have their own issues. So talking a little bit and switching gears, some of the value that you get in working with service providers. So as you develop the relationship and sell the equipment, there's obviously real-world experience in customers, and that's where a company like mine comes in. Again, we can offer consulting services to do and assist in building installations. We have recognized credentialed staff members, and we can offer remote training. So let me talk a little bit about how I got started. Our first event was ahead of the Charles, which has about 22,000 or so entries. It's a 2-day event. When we first started it, it was a situation where we actually changed people's impression in how they worked. So, for example, we were actually able to produce a product where the parents in, say, Wisconsin could actually get the results before the team getting off the water. So again, I think in a selling situation, it's important to kind of know what you can do with this stuff. So it can offer something that's better than actually being on the river in some cases, and we certainly see this. The Head of the Charles is a great solution where it also focuses a lot on how to keep the ship going. So when you have that many boats, again, the problem is no individual piece can really fail. So we spent a lot of time working through a solution where there's enough cameras and a hardware solution where you don't have that issue. Again, things like time synchronization are also really important. If you guys have questions about that, I'm more than happy to sit down over a beer and talk about it. So again, a lot of this I find interesting because again, the solution was really elegant in the end, but it was really hard to come up with, and there were a lot of challenges along the way. So every time we do this presentation, I always remind you of that. So let me talk a little bit about some other interesting ways that you can use a camera. So for open water swimming, we actually have done cameras on an in-water finish. So again, the idea is you're not on land, you're actually in a floating dock in a lake. Now, I will be the first to admit that when we did this, we used about 2,000 pounds of anchors. So you might not be able to do that everywhere, but we certainly were able to do it. So again, what you see here is the camera setup looking down a structure, but this is what the actual photo finish image looks like. And so I always thought this was interesting to see the impact of how people actually race. So with this race, it's much more like a mile race. So this is a picture of the same finish as they were finishing. But what you start to understand is that as they tap, they don't always move through the finish like you do with other sports. So it's the interesting part of, again, slightly different perspective. You learn to re-explore and re-understand the camera. So again, with this picture, what you're basically looking at, this is first from fifth. But what's crazy about this is all of the additional competitors. So again, this was 9 people completing this race in about 8 seconds. So the challenge with this is what you see with most service providers in kind of new markets. When we timed this, literally from the race officials, we got back 2 times for the first 10 athletes. So again, it's really an emphasis on how you can develop a robust, reliable solution using some of the off-the-shelf kind of stuff. So this image right here kind of gives you an idea of how difficult rowing can be. So again, you can see the finish line is way across. And you can see even in this picture like how shaded, how difficult it is to see the far shore. The steps right here, you're basically right on top of the water. This is lane 1 right here. You can barely see lane 0. So the angles at some of these venues can be a problem. Again, that's kind of why we work with such a variety of lenses. Again, it tends to be kind of a challenge. And so, like I said, with a lot of this, we do provide that kind of technical expertise. In the last 5 years, we've focused a lot on other aspects like mobile app development and combining that. So we do that both with an application you can use on a tablet for Regatta administration. We also have developed results apps for Apple and Android and all those kinds of things. So if you guys have experience you want to share, or you have needs where people are looking for even more cutting-edge mobile stuff, I can certainly talk to that over drinks as well. So last year, Doug and I had an interesting experience installing and putting together a bid for a venue here in Florida. So this tower is really kind of impressive. It's one of the biggest venues that I've actually worked in. So all the way across here is maybe, it's like 50 or 60 feet across. But what was really interesting about this venue is they wanted everything to be cutting edge. And so we had to work through an integration that involved multiple different parties. So there was a separate person who provided the food system that we used, a separate person that provided the light system. And so integrating all of that, there was a lot that kind of came out of it. So the solution had 6 cameras, and it was fairly integrated. So they were a big user of fiber optics, so we were able to accommodate all of that, not just with the networking, but with things like starting impulses. They also had a bubble finish line, which had a huge, giant compressor that ran at some odd wattages. So this picture right here is me with this was at the start and was the actual alignment for the start of the race. And so Florida had all the hurricanes last year. And so again, when you think about fairness, there's a lot of stuff that you never really think about. And so we actually had the experience where they only put 2 bags of concrete with this post at the start. And so literally we got there and I could sit on the post and move it like almost 90 degrees. So totally didn't expect that, but basically got there and realized that that wasn't going to work. And so the same day we ended up re-cementing it using 6 bags of cement. But what happened is in rowing after the last Olympics is that there were some fairness issues. They had really close races. And so they increased the tolerance, or decreased the tolerance, and made the actual specification unbelievably tight. So over a 2K race course, it's now 2 centimeters. So 2 centimeters being... So what we had to do in this point was really work with the surveyors. So I spent a lot of time, we had to survey the course maybe 6 or 8 times. And there's generally some things that we found that were problematic, not things that people had thought about. For example, some of the points were not on land. So again, surveying is all about repeatability. If you have an on-water thing, it's really hard. You can literally stand and move the structure, just by, moving your weight, that kind of thing. And again, there are other obvious complications. The venue itself was mixed use, so we couldn't assume that anything would ever be as we set it up. So this right here is within the building. What you're seeing in this little box right here is a mount that we built in order to put 2 cameras on camera bars, one on top of the other. So what you notice here is this is the guy actually doing the surveying, and so the repeatability of this was hard. So literally, you can see he has this device here, there's a prism they're putting up here, and then they're actually measuring against the finish line, which is all the way over here. So again, I think this is one of the real challenges in getting accuracy in a building like this, is as much as it sounds easy to do, this was all self-inflicted pain. This is, you can see 12 feet in the air, and just, again, generally something that you really have to work with in some of these buildings. This here is the picture of the start. So what I was showing before was the aligner, basically what we were getting the alignment from. And in this case, you can see the actual aligner hut here is actually on water. So again, kind of a no-no when you're trying to do repeatability, but something that we certainly accommodated and were eventually able to work through. What you see here, these are all the starting, the boot system itself. So prior to each race, the boats would come up, they get backed into a starting spot, and this is as close as we come to track and field in terms of alignment. What you can see here is, again, to get that repeatability, we actually had multiple points on shore. This was all either 1 or 2 centimeter fishing line that we were using to, again, align with the post on the far side. So that's what we used to get 2 centimeters. So what I always really appreciate about the fairness in these sports is that, I think it's as much as an art and as a science. Right? Occasionally you can get that, but when you get into water sports, the tolerances are much higher. Super, so that's my presentation. Sure. Yep.
In the Charles Brick setup, how do you do slip points? Do you use cameras? Or?
Yeah, there's split points used. That solution is mostly about everybody can operate independently. So at each one of the splits, the point is that if something happened at another split, it wouldn't affect anything else. So that's the primary impact of it. So the reason why it ends up being robust is that at the start and finish, you have 2 independent cameras, which actually make up 3 independent timing systems. So basically you can use combinations of the camera essentially to create some of that. But the idea is basically you can watch the results as they come in and understand the accuracy in real time. With the split part of it, it was really about collecting all that data and sending it, like I said.
Cool. Thanks, Jason.